So I think it was a couple weeks ago now. We were talking about we talked about MicroStrategy for about 7 days straight, and I was like, you know what, that's enough MicroStrategy. We've beat this thing to death. And I said, we're done. This is going to be the last thing I say about it. I went through like 10 different reasons why I think people should look into buying MicroStrategy, and I said I'm not going to talk about it for a year. And with that, I think we had about 5 people comment saying goodbye or unfollowed or unsubscribed. So they're gone. But there was actually people who said, you know what, I've been learning a lot. I value this information. Please keep doing it. So we're going to. And actually, we went from not talking about it for a whole year to now having our own MicroStrategy Mondays. So this, is, and you know what? I think it is important. It's a very big thing within Bitcoin, whether you agree with it or not, whether you hold any or not, whether you fully understand what's happening or not. It is a very big part of the whole Bitcoin ecosystem at this point, and I think it will be forever. So it is kind of worth following the journey. I think it's worth talking about and explaining as best we can on the show. And so this is going to be the first edition of MicroStrategy Mondays. And some might be longer, some might be shorter. Today's kind of a shorter one. And it's based on something that happened, last week on the channel. So somebody asked me, because I always talk about, you know, the best strategy, and this is what I've been doing, is I've been buying MicroStrategy shares within a tax-free account. So you can buy shares here in Canada, especially, and I think that this is probably similar in the US, something similar to this. So we have like our registered accounts, right? And people get really confused about the TFSA, the RRSP, how they're different, but they're registered accounts, which means that they're registered with the broker. You provided all your information to them. You have tax purposes. Everything's, attached there to you through a registered account. That's what a TFSA is, RRSP, RESP, all these different things. They're registered. So somebody asked me, the one strategy I've been suggesting to people is that put as much MicroStrategy into your tax-free account as possible. Because if this thing does what we expect it to do, could be some serious tax consequences on that. And if you don't have it in a tax-sheltered account, you're going to miss out on a lot of gains that you would have otherwise had. So somebody said, I've already maxed out my tax-free accounts. If I buy any MicroStrategy now, it's going to have to be through a normal account, a registered pension, and I'm going to have to pay capital gains on the disposal. When I go to sell this, if I've made some money on it, I'm going to have to pay tax on that. So my answer was, don't be afraid of tax. Like if you're paying a capital gain on something, that means that you made good on it. You won that trade, right? When you're selling it for more than you bought it for, you pay tax on that. But what I failed to mention in that, and it's kind of tough for me when the questions come up live on the stream, and I don't have a whole lot of time to prepare for it. But when I was thinking about it a little bit more, I thought, you know what? Even if you're going down that road, let's say that here in Canada you've maxed out your TFSA account, and you have to start putting some MicroStrategy, if that's what you want to do, into a tax. I guess not a tax sheltered account. I don't know what the wording for that would be. But even if you did that, I think that the strategy there, and I didn't think about this at the time, but I think the strategy there is, if you consider where we're moving here, Larry Fink's been talking about it, Saylor's been talking about it. It's pretty obvious at this point that everything's going to be tokenized, and you're going to be able to use that collateral, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's an Apple share, a MicroStrategy share, stablecoin in your checking account. You're going to be able to atomically swap all of those back and forth because everything's going to be tokenized, right? And so there's already platforms. I think Salt Lending is one of them in the US, where you can say, you put Bitcoin into the app and then you can take out a loan against it, which is what I recommend. It's like the rich dad, poor dad strategy, but with Bitcoin instead of real estate, which means that you buy it with an intention of never selling it. You're not going to sell it when the price goes up. You're just going to take on debt against it. You're going to take a loan against it. You're going to use it as collateral. And that's why I think that Microstrategy is going to be the biggest company on earth, because as you've seen today, they bought another 15,000 Bitcoin. I think it was 15,000 for a total of 400,000 Bitcoin. So their goal there, what they're doing is they're buying capital, they're buying future collateral. And that's something I've been talking about on this show for a very long time. Before MicroStrategy really ramped up, I said that that's what Saylor's going to do, and that's what you can do in your own life with Bitcoin. Is just think of Bitcoin as like future collateral, future leverage for your family, for yourself, for your business, for whatever it is, for your community. You're buying collateral now for very cheap prices that you're going to be able to access in the future for a lot more. So going back to the tax account there. So instead of, let's say, again, we're assuming that you've maxed out your tax sheltered account and you have to start buying MicroStrategy or a Bitcoin ETF in a non-tax sheltered account. So instead of having to pay a capital gain in 20 years from now when you sell those MicroStrategy shares, what you're going to be able to do is actually lend against them. And I didn't think about this last week, but if everything's tokenized and everything can be used as collateral that's tokenized, then you're actually going to be able to, instead of using your Bitcoin or your house or your farmland, you can take your MicroStrategy shares and take on loans against that. So just like Bitcoin, you can buy MicroStrategy today for an insanely low price compared to where things are moving here. And you can just use that as leverage forever without ever selling it and without ever having to pay tax on that. Right? So you have two strategies there today. You can buy MicroStrategy in a tax sheltered account, hold on to it, and sell it in the future, and you won't have to pay any tax on it. Or you can just put it into a regular account. And as this thing progresses, as everything becomes tokenized and collateralized, you're going to be able to use those shares and a fraction of the share. You won't have to put up a whole share of MicroStrategy, maybe half a share. But when everything's tokenized and everything's collateralized and fractionalized, then let's say that, just thinking through this, let's say that if you've looked at the projections of MicroStrategy shares in Bitcoin, based on what the price of Bitcoin is going to be in a couple of years from now, like let's say that your MicroStrategy, you bought it for $300 or $400 back in 2024, and that same share has increased to $10,000. And you need to buy new tires, and you don't want to sell your Bitcoin. You don't want to sell your MicroStrategy shares and pay tax on that. So you'll just be able to, within your app, you'll be able to take even half a share. Let's say you need $2,000. So the share is worth $10,000. You need $2,000. You don't want to sell that share because you're never going to get it back for the same price. So you're going to have to pay tax on it. So within the app, you just say, I need $2,000. You put up a 1/5 of your MicroStrategy share as collateral, and then you just get stable coins or whatever you need to pay for your tires without having to sell it, without having to incur a capital gain on that. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today in terms of MicroStrategy Mondays, just to get people thinking about the opportunity here and not being worried about the future consequences, or as people think of them as consequences, but just understand where this whole thing's moving to. And we're going to get to a point where you're not going to have to pay tax on anything, because all you're doing right now is accumulating capital. And Saylor did a 3-minute presentation to the board of directors for Microsoft. And that's what his first slide was. Bitcoin is digital capital. So you're accumulating this digital capital now, and you're never going to have to sell that. And I really want people to start thinking like that, in terms of, I'm never going to sell my Bitcoin. I'm never going to sell my MicroStrategy shares. I'm just going to be able to take on loans against them. So the one thing to pay attention to, though, is that you're going to need to have money coming in, right? If you want to repay these loans without having to sell your Bitcoin or your MicroStrategy shares, you're going to have money coming in. You're going to have to be adding value to the world and receiving some back to make the payments on the loan. But what I'm going to talk, so that's MicroStrategy Mondays for today. Put a bow on it. But what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is what this looks like for Microstrategy shares, for houses, for golf courses. I'm going to do a live podcast tomorrow for Project Potential. It'll be the first live one. But I'm going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about why it makes so much more sense to collateralize it versus sell it.